Alright, as promised, here is a review or some thoughts on All Japan Pro Wrestling's Pro Wrestling Love in Ryogoku, Volume 13, which took place a couple of weeks ago. Modern day All Japan isn't really known for good matches, which I knew going in would probably show up here, but the reason I was interested in the show was mainly the booking behind it. I mean, the booking is still interesting to me, and it's still something that might prompt me to watch more All Japan than I usually would. And what I mean is what they've done with their championships. You know, every championship in the company right now is held by an outsider. And it's interesting not only because that never happens, but their guys have to fight to get back to the top. You know, now the idea you get is that All Japan are at the bottom and their guys have to fight to regain their honor. Now, in an ideal world, what that would lead to is, showing that extra bit of effort, that extra bit of desperation in the ring, which probably isn't likely to happen, based on this show at least. But a good premise is always interesting, will always be interesting. But in this show, the exception to that lack of effort was the main event. I'm sure everyone's aware by now that Akiyama Jun, 11 years since the Noah split, has achieved what he never did in the 90s, which is win the Triple Crown Championship. This is the most meaningful thing to happen in Japan all year. The closest equivalent that I can think of in terms of American wrestling, and there's probably a better one if you guys can help me out on that. The closest equivalent that I can think of would be if WWE gave Roddy Piper the title in 2003. I would say this is bigger than that would have been, though. And the match itself definitely delivered something worthwhile. Interesting to me how it happened because you expect an Akiyama carry job, because Akiyama is a great worker, whereas Suwama is forgettable. There's no aspect of pro wrestling that he does particularly well. But there's nothing wrong with him at the same time, so he should be capable of being carried. But in actual fact, what I saw here was Akiyama slightly under-delivering and Suwama slightly over-delivering. Suwama had that desperate offense going on really well. It's helped by the context too, where, Akiyama is not the evil generic outsider trying to steal a championship. He's something more than that because he has a real claim to being the Triple Crown champion. So him winning is the storybook happy ending. But Suwama is still a respected ace, and he has to fight to prevent that storybook happy ending from happening. It's just an interesting context, and it's backed up by desperate Suwama offense. And they delivered a big finishing run as well, with all that energy going into every fall, and they built drama around the exploder suplex as well. It's a memorable finish, it's a memorable match, so definitely check that one out. And the rest of the show, not really fun to talk about, really. I mean, Sekimoto and Okabayashi versus Soya and Sanada, match number 5 in their series. If you don't already know, I was a big fan of their March match. I think in terms of a fun spot fest, they really delivered there. That was clearly the best match they were going to have, though. I mean, the June match was forgettable, and so was this one. They made this whole thing about isolating Sanada, but they made no effort to make it believable. No brutal offense from the guys in control, no desperation from Sanada. Best guy in the match was actually Soya, which doesn't say a lot. He led one fun exchange with Sekimoto, and they played off their previous lariat exchanges in nice fashion. But, those were isolated moments. Otherwise, it was very work rate heavy, a lot of dull near falls. Okabayashi was the weakest guy in the match, and he was leading the finish stretch, which was not a good thing. So I don't recommend this, and I would like to think that this is the last match in their series, even though the fact that the Big Japan guys are now the champions again means that another match is probably inevitable. But I'm not interested in seeing this match again, so that's that. Elsewhere on the show, a pair of AAA guys won the World Tag titles, which is an interesting match as well. I mean, there's some interesting personality going on in this match. The AAA guys were acceptable as bland, evil heels, and the timing of, Muta's comeback were okay. They were above average, even if none of the guys in this match were actually any good on offense. I found it interesting to a point, and they could really get into a crazy storyline with the AAA guys as their tag champions, so that would be interesting. And there was a junior heavyweight title change as well. And I think this title match is as good an excuse as any to bring up the old debate again. You know, once you start wanting your wrestling to look like a combat sport, Kenny Omega is one of those guys. You know, one of the absolute easiest guys to write off as absolute garbage. I thought the Apollo tag last year was fun, not really because of Omega, but it was fun. But really, if I'm going to be convinced that what I just said is an unfair assessment, this isn't going to be the match that changes my mind. This is going to be the match that I use as an example of why this guy sucks. You know, the first 2/3 of the match was your standard juniors back and forth stuff. Nothing offensive about it. Nothing that is particularly enjoyable to me, but it was nothing offensive really. So there were actually a few decently worked violent spots from Kai that were enjoyable by themselves. But you know, it was going along as you'd expect. But the last third of this match was so ridiculous, was so mind-numbingly stupid that I can't help but mention it. You know, they were sprinting for 10 minutes without selling, as you would expect. Then Omega hits a big spot and falls down, fatigued, deciding that it was time to sell. Strange that all of a sudden it was important for him to do that, but okay, let's see where they're going. Omega is selling, he's tired, he's less capable. That's the idea he's giving us right now. And then he goes to the top turnbuckle with Kai on his shoulders. He delays the spot for long enough for you to see that Kai is not hurt, that he's not vulnerable at all. And Omega tries the spot and it gets countered. It looked absolutely ridiculous. I mean, if you're going to start to sell, why would you go for your biggest high-risk spot in the match yet? On top of that, to make it even worse, Omega had the spot countered on him, right? And yet he never lost control of the match. They went right to the finish spot after that. You know, seriously, anyone who thought this match was good, please explain the value of this finish to me. Because if it wasn't a botch, and in some strange way it might have been a botch. Okay, it might have been a botch. It might have been a miscommunication. But if it wasn't a botch, it's one of the worst examples of abusing juniors wrestling that I've ever seen. You know, people have told me sometimes that it's just a different style. It's just a different style. No, that doesn't work for me because junior heavyweight wrestling is a style. The difference between junior heavyweight wrestling and this match is the difference between hardcore wrestling and garbage wrestling. So saying that it's a different style doesn't help the no selling make sense to me. It doesn't make the lack of match layout make sense to me. So, you know, this match might end up being an interesting debate point because I know there are people that liked this and I cannot fathom it at all. So there you go, you know, All Japan Pro Wrestling's Pro Wrestling Love in Ryogoku Volume 13. The show is not recommended, the main event definitely is, but on the whole, the booking is interesting. So the next time you hear from me, I will do the Steve Austin 2001 matches, and then following that, I will take the comments from the last video on board, and I will look at the HBK Undertaker matches. So that is that. I'll see you all later.